Our next presenter is Dr. Kwasi. And Dr. Kwasi will speak on securing substations with trust, risk posture, and multi-agent system, a comprehensive approach. Aside from a decade of experience within the telecommunication sector, Dr. Kwasi has over 6 years of experience in cybersecurity research and development, working with various industry partners on topics such as threat intelligence, data collections, attacks within the smart grid. Dr. Kwasi received his BSc and MPhil degree in computer engineering in 2007 and 2012 respectively from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana. In the February of 2024, Dr. Kwasi received his Ph.D. degree in computer science from the University of New Brunswick, specializing in smart grid security. He is involved in industrial-related cybersecurity projects with renowned industry giants like Siemens, General Dynamic Mission Systems Canada, and IBM as research team lead. His research interests include smart grid security, threat intelligence sharing, security of military-based mission-critical systems, and risk management. So at this point of time, I'll welcome Dr. Dena, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Sumit. I hope everyone can see my screen, and I hope everyone can hear me just loud and clear. Okay, so thank you everyone again. My name is Dr. Boakye-Boateng, and today I'm going to give a presentation on securing substations with trust, risk posture, multi-agent systems, a comprehensive approach. So now I'll start off with the outline. And what we're going to start off with is that we're going to talk about operational technology and smart grids. And this is to the benefit of those who have no idea what operational technology is and what smart grid is. And we'll also talk about substations, which will then give a background on what a substation is, talk about the attack and defense topics around substations. And then I will provide a CIC approach on how we look into the attack and defense scenario, specifically more on the defense part of it. And then we'll then discuss how we tested our work and then provide results on that. And then we will then finalize everything on this. So let's start off with OT, technology, and smart grids. And because the topic of this is the 5 Ws, we'll do this in a sort of a 5 Ws way. So now, what is operational technology? Now, it's a technology that you use to actually monitor and control physical devices. And you can actually find them in water treatment plants, factories, chemical plants, manufacturing plants. Those kind of classifications is what you actually term as OT. And of course, power grids, which we'll touch on power grids later. So why is OT very important? The thing is, it allows automation and it also allows efficiency, right? Because if not, a lot of the things that we do would have been a manual process. So because of that, you can say engineers, operators are really grateful. And in fact, we are all grateful that we have OT in our lives. So now let's switch to a different kind of OT or a subset of OT, which is the power grid. So now what's the power grid? It is responsible for the transmission, the generation, the transmission, and the distribution of electricity. So the fact that we have our lights on, the fact that we have everything running, power grid, pretty much, because it gives us electricity. And I can't really overstate how important that is. Now, if you have something like this power grid, which you see, and the way the power grid was designed back in the day was that it was isolated. So pretty much it stands on its own, and you wanted to run any form of any work there, you need to be on the premises and then to operate whatever's there. So now you merge the power grid with IT infrastructure. In this case, what you would call or you would term a cyber integration. And then what you actually have is what you call the smart grid. A lot of people tend to confuse smart meters with smart grid. But the thing is, smart meters is part of the smart grid. So now, if you integrate the IT infrastructure into it now it means that you can actually control it remotely. You can view whatever is going on remotely. You also have access to the data that is generated by the grid so that you can perform tasks like forecasting or prediction. And it even eases on how to actually do a purchase of power within the grid. So that is one of the key things, or that's one of the important things with the smart grid. Now, unfortunately, bringing in the cyber integration into the grid also comes up with an unforeseen problem. And that is the fact that because you integrated that, now the attack surface of the smart grid increases. Now, what do we mean by that? What's an attack surface? It's pretty much, the area within which, the points within which an attacker can actually attack. Now, because of the fact that the power grid was isolated, a lot of the attacks would have to be on premises, say Mission Impossible style, pretty much. But now you add the smart grid interface, you now introduce the smart grid. Now, what this means is that a lot of the attacks can happen remotely now. So, which means that now you have all the potential vulnerabilities most of the potential vulnerabilities that you have in the IT now gets translated into the OT now. Now we have multiple entry points of cyber threats in here. And this then becomes a target for threats known as APTs. So now we'll touch on what APTs are, because a lot of people some people might be asking, what are APTs? So let's go into what APTs are. APTs stand for Advanced Persistent Threats. Now, APTs are, number one, very sophisticated, and they are very difficult to detect. So now they have access to sensitive information. Now, and usually APTs are mostly well-resourced. So which means that they can be supported by nation-state actors. They could be supported by organized cyber criminal groups. And you can also have insider threats in this case where, for example, you have a very grumpy employee who might decide to put certain things in place because that employee knows everything about the system, and then they can decide to strike. So now the key thing with APTs is that once they stay within the system, they now monitor everything within the system, trying to identify what to attack, and then they can, run the attacks. And these can lead to ransomwares. These can also lead to outages within the smart grid. So there are some notable APT examples. For example, we have Stuxnet, which actually happened in Iran in 2010. And then I also jump to Black Energy, which also occurred in Ukraine, where in this attack, they actually compromised the system, gave fake information to the engineers that everything was okay whilst they were reconfiguring the devices. And then they turned off the power grid and the engineers couldn't see it. And then they blocked the communication lines so that when customers were trying to call, they couldn't actually reach the utility providers. It took 6 hours to bring things back online. And now one of the most sophisticated threats out there, which is the pipeline, which was detected in 2022, had a lot of modules pretty much 100% prepared for the grid. So in this case, it didn't really need to spend a lot of time to identify devices and then build malware specific for those devices because they had already built a lot of them for well-known attacks. But luckily, it was not deployed. So now let's talk about substations. So what's a substation? I would say some might say substation is the heart of the smart grid. I would also say it's kind of like the pressure points of the smart grid because it is what is responsible. It sits in the middle during the entire process from the transmission to the distribution. Now, if you compromise all the substations within the grid, then it means you're going to have power outages within the grid. So now the substation actually converts voltages either from high to low or from low to high. And without the substations, the smart grid really wouldn't work. So now let's look at the attack surface of the substation. Now, what happens within the substation is that there is a device within the substation called the intelligent electronic device. And that is what controls something called a circuit breaker. Now, if the circuit breaker is responsible for turning things on and off when there's an issue. So now, if you control the IED, you pretty much control the circuit breaker. So that's usually the most focal point of attack. In some situations, they use something called what is called a PLC, but the IED is smarter. So now this is how an attack happens within a substation. So first, the attacker actually compromises the control center, and then the attacker now performs what you call a reconnaissance to identify the IEDs to attack. It reconfigures those IEDs, and then it will now strike to impair and shut down everything down. And that is where you end up having an outage, as you can see right here. Okay, so let's continue. So now, what are usually the cyber resiliency approaches that have to do with protecting the substation? Now, usually if you can detect it in time, what would happen is that you have to shut down the system, and then you need to actually perform an impact assessment or certain forensics. And that would also take some time. And usually if there's a complete attack, then it means you need to have a manual intervention to bring things back, run your forensics attack, run your forensics on it. And these also take time. Now, one might ask, if that's the case, why is it so hard to protect substations? Well, there are some reasons. Number one, performance constraints, in the sense that due to the nature of the substation, you can't place an IDS or intrusive detection system within the substation because it will mess up the process of the substation, which means you can have erratic power supply. Now, the other aspect is that when the APTs compromise the control center, they use legitimate commands. So the IED themselves cannot actually determine whether these requests are malicious or not. And the IED devices themselves also don't have the resources to actually have advanced detection techniques. And that's a very unique challenge. And also we have what you call the legacy devices, or you can say the old school devices, such that you dare not touch them, or you can have some issues. So these are one of the challenges. So now, because of that, what we are looking at is that we wanted to use a trust framework where, in this case, it's kind of like trust. When you see someone and then you know the person starts to behave differently, you know something is going on, something weird is going on. So kind of like human trust being placed in the IED, such that the IED now becomes the last line of defense. If it detects any malicious requests, it'll cut off the malicious communicating, the malicious devices, and then notify the security operations center, and then also update the substation's rig posture, because based on the position of the IED, you can say, well, 90% of stuff will be affected. So now let's go on. So this is the game plan. We first need to come up with a trust model, then come up with a risk posture model. In this case, it'll determine what percentage of the substation is a risk. Then we use the Modbus protocol because it is widely used. And then we also look at certain attack scenarios. And based on that, we also generate data sets for people to use. Now, we were also looking into the future where we want the IEDs to think for themselves, to be autonomous. And in this case, the aim is to use a multi-agent system, where in this case, a multi-agent system is a system that contains intelligent agents and where they must contribute to make sure that the substation is secure. And in this case, we're using a centralized approach. So now let's talk about how we implemented this. Now, the first thing that we did was that we actually implemented this in a virtual machine, because actually having an actual test bed for a substation costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we wanted to have that challenging approach to see if we can do something that mimics the real thing. So now we Dockerized our test bed. It was a Docker environment where the IEDs would represent a container, the SCADA HMI will be a container, the attacker device will be a container, and the central agent will be the container. So the central agent in this case is the one that actually computes the risk posture of the substation. And then we have our model being in a Java file, and we place them in certain IEDs and certain SCADA containers. In this case, we'll call them the trust devices. And then we have to mimic the physical aspect of the substation. In this case, we use the IED to generate voltages, and then it was more of a tap changer kind of a scenario. So if the voltage value is going at is going beyond certain ranges, then the SCADA HMI, after sending Modbus request, will tap up or tap down the IED to send those commands, and then it will bring it back to the actual voltage. Now, if you're having over voltage and under voltage situations, then the SCADA script will then instruct the IED to shut down the circuit breaker. Now, every log that was generated by our trust IEDs would be sent to the ELK stack, and that's where we actually create the SOC style kind of visualization. So if there's an attack that is detected, it is written to a log, and everything is pushed in real time, and then you will see it, and it happens within seconds. So now this is the kind of architecture that we're having here. So we have the trust IED being the one that we have that would do the detection, and then we have a regular IED that would be compromised, and then we also have a SCADA IED that can be compromised to actually represent the actual scenario, and then also have an external attack, and then our central agent here. Now ELK stack does the visualization. So now let's talk about the kind of attacks. We just couldn't do any attack anyhow. So we had to map this to the MITRE ICS attack framework so that our attacks would be guided. So we actually picked 4 tactics, and that's the ones on the left that are actually block colored. We looked at collection, we looked at inhibits, response function, impair, control, and evasion to evade. So based on these attacks, we're pretty much running reconnaissance first, because you need to find out what you're dealing with. And then denial of service attacks, such as query flooding, and also inserting malicious payloads. And then we can also have impair control, process control, where we can actually attack the devices or attack by writing to the calls. It means that we're writing to a circuit breaker to turn things off, or trying to write to all circuit breakers. So these were the testing scenarios. We're looking at scenarios where, number one, the first scenario would be to use a regular SCADA HMI. In this case, that one is actually vulnerable. And then within that scenario, we look at an attack from an external device, where in this case, the attack is from outside of the network. And then we will then look at the classic way where the SCADA is compromised, and then it runs attack commands are sent. And then we looked at the second situation where we're having a trusted SCADA HMI. And in this case, you're having an IED that has been compromised, and then is actually sending attacks towards the SCADA. So these are the 2 that we looked at. So now let's look at the results of this. So let's go. So in the first one, where we're looking at the compromised SCADA attack, now everything was going normal, as you can see here, right? And then an attack happened here, and it was flagged with an unknown write query attack, as you can see right in this corner here. So once that attack happened, it was blocked all the way. So the communication was just blocked throughout. And you can see that the alert here shows that it is a severe kind of attack. Now let's look at the next one. So now, based on that attack, because this IED was ranked as one of the most critical IEDs in this situation, the central agent then flagged that 95% of the site of the substation is at risk. And that is what was actually provided here in this dashboard. So now let's look at the second kind of attack. And in this case too, it was a query flooding attack. So we looked at the denial of a service attack. And once that happened, you would notice that when the packets started becoming very fast, it was quickly flagged based on various kind of attacks. You can see query flooding in here as well. And then once that happened, there was a blacklist of that SCADA HMI that was compromised, and the alert was here as well. Now, because this IED was actually more of a low-rank IED, it actually gave a 15% risk posture. Now, let's look at the attack from a compromised IED. In this case, the IED was compromised, and for this, it actually sent the compromised IED was trying to send fake values, and our trusted SCADA HMI was able to detect this one too, as well as can be seen over here, and it was blacklisted throughout. And because this IED that was compromised was also a high-ranking IED, pretty much on the same level as the first one, the central agent actually ranked this as that 95% of the substation was at risk because of that. Now let's talk about the dataset structure that was generated out of this. So the first thing that happened was that for our data sets, we made sure that they weren't very large. We had to slice them up into 100 MB files, and so that it can easily be loaded. Now we also have attack captures as well, which actually contains the attacks from the various scenarios. Now with this attack capture, what we actually did was that we made sure that it contains both the attack and benign captures, which would make it which should make it a challenge for anyone who wants to build anomaly detection models to make sure it's robust. And we also have totally benign captures available, and that one can be used for training before you run the attack captures in your, say, machine learning model. And then because mixing up the attack and benign captures, the labeling would be very difficult. We have attack logs that include the timestamp, the attack type, and then the transaction ID so that you can easily identify them. Now, what we also did was that we did the captures in multiple ways. We have the point of view captures where the captures were taken from each individual device or each individual container. And within this scenario, if you want to implement device-only anomaly detection, or if anyone wants to actually perform research or trust-based kind of research, you can use these captures without the need of trying to filter out only devices for your research. And then we also had network-wide captures as well, which is usually the classic type that we normally have. And for this, it's just captured from the bridge, and then you can use this holistically if you want to do a network-wide anomaly detection, like a general intrusion detection kind of research. So now, let's come up with the 5 Ws of the CIC datasets. So the question is this: our colleagues have really done well. So who needs it? Utility providers is available to vendors. It's also available to cybersecurity researchers. What are they? We have the CIC Modbus Dataset 2023, CIC IOV 2024, CIC IONT 2024, CIC IoT 2022 and 2023. And we also have the CIC EVSE 2024. So these are there for substation, vehicles, IoT, IoT, and EV charging station kind of research. Now, we also have older ones as well that are also available. You can also look at them as well. I'm just presenting these because of what my colleagues presented here. And they were actually released in 2022, 2023, 2024. And we will still keep on generating more. And you can always find them at our CIC website, which you can find in the link below. Or you can just Google CIC dataset, and it'll just pop right up. And we really value our data sets in the sense that it actually provides realistic benchmarks, and then it also facilitates evaluation techniques for threat classification and also for various forms of anomaly detection. So with this, I shall wrap up, and I would say thank you everyone for being here, and I'll be waiting some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kwasi. Again, that was very enjoyable, very knowledgeable, and thanks for sharing your experience and your insight with us. Now, with this, we are definitely coming to the last lap of today's section, and let's see if we have some questions from our viewers. So it does seem we do have a couple of questions for you. So the first question from our viewers is, what are the challenges in setting up a test bed for cybersecurity scenario?
Well, if you're looking at smart grids, the key challenge has to do with the fidelity of the test bed, trying to make sure that it's very realistic. And most of the time, you would say you would need physical, the physical properties of it, how to model the electricity part of it, the voltage part of it, the transient part of it. That is usually the most challenging part. The cyber is not really that tough. And also, one of the key challenges would also be the cost of it, because these are very expensive to set up. And what I would say is that CIC is also in the process of actually setting up our own test beds here at our labs. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kwasi. We just have one more question before we wrap up today's session. So the question is, are there any considerations for other kind of OT protocols?
Yes, we will definitely be looking at DNP3 and IEC 61850. We started with Modbus because it's one of the most common ones and is still being used to date, pretty much across the entire OT protocols, not just the smart grids, but then you can also use them in water treatment plants as well. You can also have them in chemical plants in various places too. So yeah, now that we've handled that, now we'll focus on DNP3 and IEC 650, and those will be coming out soon as well with our industrial partners. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kwasi. Before we wrap up today's session, it does seem we do have one more question, and I promise this is the last question on today's session. And the question, sort of themes around as we are moving from conventional ways of getting electricities at home to more of a smart grid technology, where the smart grid is continuously trying to capture data from the user and use that actionable data into taking the technology forward. So in such a scenario, should the average user be worried? Are there any standard practices that they should be doing in order to make sure that their household is safe when they're adapting this new technology?
Okay, so from the if you're looking at IoTs at home, devices at home, just make sure that all your devices are patched. Avoid situations like password 1234 on your devices, and admin 123, those kind of scenarios. But then if you're looking at from the power grid side, say smart meter side of it, things, I think most utility providers have started to implement very robust security protocols because they've seen how the damages can be. So they're trying to make sure that it's also secure. So for the users, as long as you are having all your devices well patched up, your passwords are secure, you are actually ensuring security sanity. Yep, you should be fine.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kwasi. Your presentation did gain a lot of interest, and we had a lot of interest from the viewers, and hence. So with this, we are coming to the end of today's session, And I must say, as we draw close to end of our session, I want to thank every one of you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to share insight into the vibrant world of cybersecurity with our audience. Thank you. Thank you from CIC, and have a good rest of the day.